We are really spoiled for great dials these days, and I think this is a great one here from IWC. Hello, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. Today we are talking about a new watch from IWC. Well, it's kind of new. It was released last year. This is the new Ingenieur Automatic 40, or the reference 3289. This is a watch that takes the Ingenieur back to its Genta era design roots. Of course, the story of the Ingenieur goes back much further than that, but with the surging popularity of integrated bracelet sport watches that we've experienced over the past few years, and this is a watch that we had been waiting for, maybe even expecting from IWC. This is the first time that they've gone back to this style of a design language for the Ingenieur since the 3239, which was released in 2013. So this watch here, the 3289, is not a throwback. It's not a reissue. It's not meant to look like an old watch. It's really picking things up from that Genta design DNA and putting a modern variation, a modern spin, a modern interpretation of it into use here. And I think they've done a great job of that in this watch. And there's a few reasons why. This really kind of comes down to four details around this new Ingenieur that set it apart from the original. I think there are a lot of really great, beautiful throwback designs and reissue watches that we see these days. But when brands are looking to launch a new collection and they do that, they kind of back themselves into a corner right out of the gates, because where do you go from there? Now, if you're starting with a collection that has a clear identity, I think it's important to build on something new, an original idea that provides a new foundation for it that can be built on. Now, the Ingenieur is an interesting watch because it's had something of a dual identity. Now, the Ingenieur received its Genta design in 1976, but the watch itself dates back to the 50s, so it had a very well-established identity of what it was leading up to that point, unlike the other Genta designs from the 70s that are so famous, the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. While they all share an integrated bracelet design, they each differ in their own way. Now, the Royal Oak has its unique bracelet and porthole bezel design with all the screws setting it in. The Nautilus has a bit of a softer case to it, and it has a female end of the case that accepts an articulating link in its center, and the IWC Ingenieur had a male link at the end of its case, as well as a porthole bezel done a little bit differently from the Royal Oak. There was no screws in this one. There was just 5 recesses. So each of them looked a bit similar, but they all had a distinct case shape. So this is the era that IWC has gone to for inspiration for the new reference, the 3289 that we have here. But again, it differs in a few important ways that really kind of sets it on its own track and gives it its own foundation upon which IWC can build. So starting with some of the facts, this is a steel watch. They do make a titanium version of this as well. The steel version has 3 different dial colors: silver, black, and aqua, as seen here. The titanium version gets a kind of all grayed out uniform texture, bead blast type textured with polished chamfers around the edges. It's a really beautiful design in titanium, but steel is where the roots of this collection really lie. And I think that they've done a good job here with the proportionality of the case and the taper on the bracelet. Everything comes together really nice here, and this bracelet is quite exceptional. The aqua dial version that we have here is unique in that it's the only one that gets a polished center link, which I feel accents the aqua dial rather nicely, and I'm generally not a huge fan of polished center links, but I think it adds a nice differentiation in the finish here on this watch. Now, of course, this is still an integrated bracelet design, but there are a handful of things here that separate it from the original that I think are worthy of note. Not all of them are that big a deal, but I think they all add up to an appreciably different watch that offers a really unique experience as a modern watch. Okay, let's start with the crown guards. Now, the original from 1976, the SL designed by Genta, did not have crown guards on it. Neither did the Royal Oak, and the crown guards on the Nautilus were a slightly different story. Maybe it's something that he wasn't quite fond of designing into these watches in this era. They have added the crown guards here in this one, and I think it adds a slightly more muscular presence for the case as a whole. You may like it, you may not. Is it necessary? Probably not, but I think it does lend something unique to the aesthetic at a glance and serves to separate it from the original a little bit more. All right, next is the bezel. This is still a porthole design bezel with 5 recesses. However, each of these get a bolt through it that helps secure it to the case. So these aren't just empty recesses anymore. Again, it's a small detail, but visually it's another element that helps separate it from the original as well. And they are arranged symmetrically here instead of just kind of randomly screwed in wherever they end up. And the heads heads of those bolts in the recesses are polished. So again, it adds kind of a unique look and feel to the watch overall. Okay, moving on to maybe one of the bigger ones here, we have the dial. Now this dial utilizes what IWC calls as a grid pattern, and this is a take on the original dial in the SL, which had a very similar pattern, however scaled down slightly, and it was executed in a far more subtle way. So it was something that you'd maybe notice at the right angle, maybe not. Here IWC has dialed that pattern up to 11. There's a lot of depth in it. It is comprised of horizontal bars that are set against these square dots in a basket weave type pattern here. And in this aqua color especially, it's very dynamic. One of the more dynamic dials that I have experienced. It looks like a different color, a different shade almost, in every single light that I've seen it in, and at almost every single angle that you can view it in too. There's even something of an iridescent quality about this dial in certain light. It's a really fantastic dial that sets it apart from other integrated bracelet watches out there, and also capitalizes on the popularity of intricately detailed, beautiful dials, which is not a bad thing. I think it works really well here. It also works well in black and in the silver and in the titanium, and each one of them look decidedly different as a result. This does have the polished applied indices here that are long and thin, just like the hands. It's very reminiscent of the original. There's a high contrast quality between them and the ever-changing dial underneath. Okay, finally is the bracelet here. This is where it makes maybe its biggest departure from the original. It moves from that male end of the case into a female end of the case and accepts an articulating link there at the center. And this is a great move ergonomically. It helps the bracelet start flowing around the wrist in a much more organic fashion than having a stiff male link there on the end of the case. But this does affect the shape of the case. It's not quite the same as the original, which had a very distinct shape because of that. And I think this is a good move, and it helps wearability overall. It also helps set this watch within its own context. So not only is it more comfortable than a male link there would have been, it also looks a little bit different, a little cleaner, a little more modern as well. So these four things all add up to give this watch some distance between itself and the SL, while also maintaining an obvious link to the DNA that made that watch so special in the first place. I think IWC has done a really great job with this watch overall. The bracelet is probably the most impressive element of this watch, and it's something that's really hard to kind of get through in the videos and in pictures. It's really something that you have to experience for yourself, and I suspect that this is what accounts for most of the price that we see around this watch that raised a few eyebrows when it was released. Now, one of the things absent in the bracelet here is a quick adjust mechanism to make small adjustments up to a few millimeters on the fly. You're not going to get that here. However, there is a clasp that would fit this, that could be fitted to this watch. It's something that IWC may be bringing to this watch in the future. However, I think it looks much better and more seamless with this butterfly clasp. And I like this quite a bit. It looks great and kind of seamless in the design, and it also wears really well if you can get the watch size perfectly for your wrist right out of the box, which could be a little bit of a challenge here given that there is no way to make smaller adjustments. If the size can't be fit perfectly with the links that are given here, then you're probably gonna have a bad time on this watch, and you're gonna need something that will offer you the adjustments. So this watch is $11,700. That's a lot of money. Do I think it's worth that much? No. But I don't think it's as far away as you might think. It's very close, and a lot of it comes down to how it wears on the wrist. This watch does utilize their in-house, in-group automatic movement, the 32-111. You know, they could have stuck with the ETA movement here and it wouldn't bother me one bit. However, the general market still seems to see this as something that adds a lot of value. I don't think it's quite in the movement exactly. I think it's in the bracelet more than anything. The bracelet and the case execution here is really exceptional, and I think that's what makes this watch feel pretty close to its asking price. So overall, this is a beautiful watch, and I'm really glad that IWC didn't just reissue the original SL. I like that they made some changes here to it, and I like that they've created a platform here that they can keep building on into the future and really establish this as the design language of the collection moving ahead. Now, I mentioned that this is a watch that has had something of a dual identity, and of course has gone back and forth between that kind of classic, simple round case design that it started with in the 50s and the Genta era design that we see here. Now, this offers them the opportunity to lean into that identity a bit more and create more of a consistent identity over generations with this watch, which has been kind of lacking in the past. You know, I think this is a great starting point for them to start exploring that in earnest, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here. I have a lot more of my thoughts on this watch now live over at thedeeptrack.com. I'll leave a link to that down below. And a reminder that the Deep Track is viewer supported. You can find a link to our Patreon down below as well. If you enjoyed this content, now's a great time to subscribe, and leaving a like and sharing helps me out a lot as well. All right, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care.